from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. It is draft week. Of course, the Broncos with 9 overall picks, at least as we sit right now. They've got 3 day 2 picks and no round 1 pick, but still plenty of opportunities for the Broncos to improve their team. And I thought, Ben, we'd take a look at what George Paton said in his press conference along with Darren Moogie and maybe draw some inferences on what we think is going to happen. Now, George Paton, first of all, got to give a little hat tip to George Paton, acknowledging how important Russell Wilson is not only to what the draft looks like, how they're building things, but they're even involving Russell Wilson and getting some of his thoughts on what the Broncos maybe should be pursuing.
Yeah, and I think that input is good. You know, Russ is coming with a different attitude from outside the organization. Maybe he's going to see some things you're not. I think getting that input, getting that feedback only helps strengthen your knowledge base in the room. It helps strengthen your diversity of opinion in the room. You don't have to do everything that Russell Wilson says or even anything that Russell Wilson says, but I think getting that input and that feedback, I think is valuable.
100%. I also love that they said they're going to watch Russell Wilson highlights during the first round, which is, I mean, more or less exactly what you should be doing because, yeah, you know that you're missing out on a potential blue chip player, but this is a unique draft. And we said this a lot on the Broncos Country Tonight radio show, as well as here on the TV show. This is a very deep draft. And yeah, there are some top 10 players that you'd say, yeah, I absolutely, you add these players to your team, they make an immediate impact, kind of like Pat Surtain did last year. But when we get into like the teens, into the all the way to like 50 and 60, I think there's going to be some really talented players that could make impact year 1 to year 2 as well.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a whole heck of a lot of a gap from about pick 20 to about, pick 70 maybe. I think that the players in that range are all the same talent tier. I think there's about 20 guys that you have kind of a blue chip grade on in this draft. And then after you get into that, it's fat in the middle with guys that are good, maybe not that top tier, but they're good. And I think more or less in that same range. So, a lot of people talking about Paton maybe moving up. I mean, and he might, but I think you can just kind of sit back and let the board fall to you and let talented players land in your lap, at 64 and with these day 2 picks that they have.
And he acknowledged that. He said, it's tough to know right now at 64 how things might look. They, of course, do mock drafts. They're going to roll through all the scenarios. But in the end, he said there could be a situation where we're looking at 5 to 10 players right in front of us saying we can get any one of these guys. Maybe we can trade back. Or you might say a lot of our players that we really love are going off the board. We might have to consider trading up. Now, acknowledging the conversation we had last week about trading up into the first round, that's not going to happen. They could trade up in the second round. And it's a little bit of a kind of like Javonte Williams, where you see a player that you absolutely want, that you covet, and you're willing to pay the freight, understanding that you might have to split those picks behind you in order to recoup some of it.
Yeah, and Paton has shown a propensity and a penchant for doing that. He has the strategy down that he likes, and we saw that play out last year. They still got players that they liked, and got productive players that they like. So I wouldn't be too concerned if they want to move up a little bit and get a guy and then want to move back and get their guys. I wouldn't be too concerned. I think they'll be able to do it. I think that he's got a good feel for how to pull that off. Some people don't, and I'm confident.
I'm absolutely confident. A couple other things that he sort of talked about during the press conference. Talked about they aren't changing their process so much. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Like not changing your process even without that first round pick and without that high second round pick. How that seems like it would change your process just by the definition of not approaching what would be, hey, we're going to take a top 10 pick here. We're going to have a top 10 pick at the beginning of the second round. You're more or less in a wait and see what's going to be available to you. You have no chance to really change much of that. So he said they're not changing the process. It sort of feels like it's forced to change a little bit.
Well, I think you have the framework with which you approach all this, and I think that's the process. I don't think you're going to change that per se. Like you have a core philosophy, and you're not changing that. I think you may change. Where you're sitting in terms of the pick number when if there's players that are falling and you're like, I need to get up and get that. But I think your core philosophy and the core framework with which you acquire talent, I don't think that changes. I think you have your principles, your tenets, whatever you have, and I think you just roll with that and you adjust to try to capture talent that's falling when you can.
A lot of people are picking edge rusher for the Broncos at 64. And we know this is a very deep, talented class. George Paton acknowledged the talented edge rusher, but it's not one of those that I think we project a little bit more so because we think of the talent. But oftentimes when a class is deep, that's actually the opportunity to take one later.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you've got a deep class, that's going to allow you the latitude to be able to kind of sit back and see, you compile your list and you put a minimum cutoff. Like all the players above this, I'd be comfortable with. Anybody below this, I'm not. And so it's riding that train and watching as those players come off the board. When you get down to 2 or 3 of them left, then you need to make your move. If you got 6 edge guys that you believe in sitting on the board, why not just wait? Take the things that you can take right there, and you can kind of wait a little bit and allow that stuff to fall in your lap.
Yeah, and so for the Broncos, that might be exactly the plan here because there's a few positions you'd like to add a little bit of depth. It seems like the Broncos are in a bit of advantageous spot, the way I look at it, because they could use that second pick. They could trade up a little bit, grab somebody that they absolutely covet, that they think could be a starter by next year, especially if it's an edge rusher and you have some decisions to make with Bradley Chubb. You could, of course, you stay put, you trade back. The point of whatever you're adding, whether it's day 2, day 3, whatever, these are guys that are depth. They're competing for roster spots, especially when you get into the day 3 and the UFAs. I sort of feel like the Broncos have done a pretty good job putting themselves in position to not be desperate one way or the other. Yeah,
I think that's the important note as we head into this draft to kind of have at the forefront. They're not desperate for anything. They do need some depth at the edge, but beyond that, they're really not desperate for anything. There are some things they need to come away with, but they have the flexibility to be able to take them in whatever order and kind of work their board because they're not in a spot where they absolutely 100% need to come away with whatever one specific thing. All right, the last one here, and this was a great point made by George Paton and Darren Mugi as they talked about how COVID has impacted this upcoming draft and more so the depth of talent. We've talked about that a ton. I want to kind of come back to that point, though, because as a result of it, some of these players are older, and that's something that we haven't necessarily spent a lot of time on. I don't think it's a huge thing, but if a guy is viewed as developmental, if he's a project, if we hope by year 3 he's a starter for us and he's already 24 or 25, that does have to play a little bit of a factor. For some positions it does. The human body and the strength, there's a difference between a 21-year-old and a 25-year-old in terms of how developed their body is at peak athleticism. So I think there are things to watch out for with that. That said, there are some positions where I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters at offensive tackle. I really don't. I mean, Garrett Bowles was an older prospect or whatever. It took him a little while, but he turned out just fine. I think it really is about whether the guy's just topped out. What are the things you can coach versus can't, and you look at it that way. And with body types, a 25-year-old defensive tackle versus a 21-year-old defensive tackle, there's going to be a different body type. One of those guys is probably going to have grown man strength, be ready to play. One of them probably isn't. That's a really good point. So the flip side of that coin is there are some guys developmentally that actually might be further ahead. They can hit the ground running. Yeah, and I think that's the thing you've got to weigh a little bit is, what is the floor? What is the ceiling? Who is this player and what can they be and what's the wind up for them to get there? Yeah, no, I think that's going to be fun. All right, over the course of the rest of the week, we'll be spending a lot of time dialing in on what the Broncos might likely do there on day 2 of the NFL Draft. For Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching Broncos Country Tonight.